Hi there, I'm John Baumgart, and today I want to talk about one of my favorite 80s comedies, Revenge of the Nerds. And this will be a very nerdy analysis of the movie, with the subject being why they could never produce this movie in 2021 2020. I'm filming it in the beginning of January. So, to get right into it, you'll be surprised at my reason why. But I'm going to start by mentioning that from our lens of modern day times, let's say 2020, just to make it sound better, this movie is a Me Too nightmare. There are a variety of scenes that are very misogynistic to say the least, and the things they do are illegal. I mean, breaking into a sorority and installing cameras and filming women without their consent is obviously illegal. And then to sell an image of doesn't matter, a man or a woman, you simply can't sell nude images of someone for profit. Obviously, we all know this. And then there's the most egregious scene in the movie, one that most people talk about even to this day, where Louis Skolnick he catfishes Betty Childs, and then after she realizes it was him after the fact, it's very important. She's like, "Wow, I mean that doesn't happen in real life. That's rape." We all know it. And so this movie, like I mentioned, is a Me Too nightmare. And I've seen many comments on different channels showing trailers or whatever, saying you could never produce this, blah blah blah. It's true, and for good reason on this regard. Now, I will explain a little bit more why, but just to take a step back, uh, yes, it's very clear that the things that are promoted in this film we should not do. This is obvious, but I also think it's a comment on our society that I think maybe it's because movies are so real, or they place a certain status on celebrities, that it seems people more and more in modern day times can't separate fact from fiction. I mean, you can watch a Romeo and Juliet play, and I doubt if there's a couple who are in love and their parents don't approve that they're going to make a suicide pact. I mean, it's okay, these things probably have happened, and I'm sure you could say some people, looked at that play back then and it slightly influenced their love life. But 99.9% of people are not going to do that, nor are they going to enact in any of the violence that you see in movies or video games or, or suggestions in music. So I also think that people kind of take everything a little bit too literally in modern day times, and they can't separate the fact that this was a comedy, and it's not implying that you should do these things. Now, with that said, I think there is a need to recognize what they did was wrong, and not just from a legal standpoint, but from a moral standpoint. You can't just take someone's likeness, especially if they're naked, and distribute it. Um, but it was different times back then. I actually listened to a Siskel and Ebert review of the movie, and it would have been completely different. And this is the whole point of my video, if this movie were made now. So in their review, they were just saying, "Oh, these guys, they're having fun. They're doing the usual college pranks, blah blah blah." They even bring up some of these points, but it's all in jest. And I think we have to go back, and understand in time things are a little different. First, this movie was made in 1984. Uh, VHS tapes existed, but it wasn't so dominant as it became later on. Most people just went to the theater. So most people maybe saw the movie once or twice. They didn't have the luxury we do now of finding it like that on YouTube, going through each scene in detail, like I will in this video. And so, to spread the word, because it was pre-internet days, I think you had to do things that were a little bit dicey. Furthermore, there was different kind of cultural battle going on in the 80s than there were now. I mean, the conservatism, or kind of a puritanical view on sexuality, was still pervasive. You had an older generation telling you, no, 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 don't do this, sex is bad. And of course, whenever you do that, it's like Murphy's third law. Whatever you push against, you're gonna get back. So a lot of these '80s movies, not just Revenge of the Nerds, had just random nude scenes. They were very hypersexualized because that's what people wanted to see because they were told it's bad. So it's almost a human nature. And I think when they were writing this movie, they definitely didn't have the foresight of the future, like this video, to know that, oh yeah, these things are bad. They just thought, let's. It's not to say they didn't think they were morally wrong, but they said, let's put a few risque things in this movie to get people to talk about it, to get them to the theater, because that's how you make money. That's how most of these movies at this time, they were box office generating films, not made for TV or made for video. Although they were subsequently released, but if it was on TV, it was censored. So you can see, it's a different medium altogether. And I think for this reason, there wasn't so much emphasis really placed on a few of these scenes. But it doesn't take away from the fact that, yes, now in modern day times, we know it's wrong. And, I don't think you could produce a movie that would have that. It would be highly controversial. But it's actually not the reason why I think you couldn't make this movie. So just like Louis Skolnick, I'm going to catfish you. I'm not here on a Me Too crusade. Actually, I think there's something larger at play. And, I'll be very critical of our culture here. Now, it's a spoiler alert, although I think if you're watching this, you've probably seen Revenge of the Nerds, so I don't think I'm giving away anything. In my opinion, I don't think that you could film Revenge of the Nerds in 2021 due to the main plot of the movie. And I'm going to apply the current cultural lens so you can understand the basic idea being that a group of mostly white, let's say privileged men, because they are in college, and so they're definitely well off, approach an all-black fraternity and ask them to become a member. This would be attacked so much. I mean, Hollywood especially has a very, very extreme left-leaning viewpoint, and they would use a word like cultural appropriation. How dare these privileged white people, mock this fraternity, and they would never allow such a movie to be made on the cultural grounds. Their line, not mine, but their line of thinking is these privileged white men, they're already in university, they will graduate and they will become successful and well off. What suffering could they have? And why on earth would they bother or even dare beg this poor black fraternity who's had to fight and struggle, even probably to become recognized? Why would they ever seek membership? That's a slap in the face of society. And, if they were to ask, then, because they have so much power in our society, these white men, then the black fraternity would be forced to acquiesce, and that's how they would justify the film. But it's all nonsense. But I hold this to be true, that they would look, the current cultural gatekeepers would look past all the misogyny, and they would instead focus on this hyper-racialized viewpoint. And, this is where I just think our culture currently is absurd. Because, now I'm reading deeply into this 80s comedy, but I do think one of the more true progressive points the film made was one of mutual oppression. That, let's think about it. The movie was made in 1984, and the civil rights movement only happened roughly 20 years earlier. So that would be in modern day times the year 2000, because now it's 2020. So if you're older like me, that doesn't seem so long ago. So keep in mind that wasn't too long, and it's troped out a lot, but in the words of Martin Luther King, look at someone's character instead of their skin color. I view this main theme of Revenge of the Nerds as positive. That now initially, when this is quoted in the movie, when they wanted to take in the nerds, they told them that, well, we can't accept you because you're nerds. And I think that just was running in the theme of the movie. But it was obvious when they displayed all the plaques of the fraternity members. It was a joke. Almost all these guys are white. So it was obvious what they were trying to do. Nevertheless, in the end of the movie, there's, if you've seen it as many times as I have, They get their fraternity house destroyed by the jocks who are upset that they won, the homecoming competition. And, the dean, he now feels more empowered because, he's like a short, bald guy in glasses, and he identifies as a nerd now. And, he's kind of going to the coach, who's a young John Goodman, and he's saying, look, I know it was your guys, and John Goodman's going to throw him in the fountain. And then you hear kind of like the 70s like bass music, like boom, 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 like a funky bass. And then all the Tri Lambdas come out, and, they stop it. And they allow Gilbert to make the speech. And, he's saying, look, we're all nerds. Everyone here is a nerd, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, this is a positive message because it shows solidarity beyond racial lines. That, why is it, if you want to really read into the movie deeply, that the all-black, Tri-Lambs allowed the nerds in? It's because they knew in this microcosm, in this university, that although most of the nerds were white, but there was a few minorities, that they basically, were on the lowest of the social scale. The jocks kicked them out of their dorm room, and they were sharing half the gymnasium while basketball was going on. I mean, they were trying to study, and they had a horrible environment, which is, it was demoralizing. So they were, the equivalent of social untouchables. And so, the nerds couldn't get any other fraternity to accept them, and because they're nerds, they found a loophole. I'm kind of rehashing the whole movie, but the idea was this all-black fraternity at least understood the idea of a type of oppression, and, that's obvious what happened in America, and they recognized it, and they said, look, we understand, so we'll let you in. Once again, it's a very kind of deep read into the movie, but I think it's a positive message. So it showed some 20 years after the civil rights movement that, once again, in going with the lines of Martin Luther King, you can look past someone's skin color and see, look, these guys are being repressed, they're being, having their rights taken away, their liberties, etc. on this campus due to their social status, because they're intelligent, and that was another theme at the time that's not so much. I mean, look at, nerds really got their revenge. I mean, all the social media companies, etc., are all controlled by nerds, so it's a different time. But back then, intelligence was kind of mocked upon, that masculinity was kind of looked at in only a single lens through just aggression, represented by the jocks, where, the nerds are showing, look, we can dominate in a different type of way using our intelligence. So that was also, a positive message to show different sides of masculinity. But, I don't approve of their tactics against the sorority. So the idea here being, you can never make this, getting back to the theme, you can never make this movie because this whole spiel I gave about solidarity would all be swept under the rug, and people would look at it purely from the lens of race, saying, how dare these white guys approach a black fraternity, overlooking all of this. And to me, that is not progressive, but regressive, because the cultural gatekeepers have gone too far. They cannot look at individual circumstances. Yes, in this movie, and once again, this is a deep read into the movie, but in this movie, it's a bunch of white guys going to school. And you could say they're going to suffer for 4 years, but they'll graduate and they will become very well off. That's true. But in this microcosm, in this university, they're actually the lowest of the low. Really, it's not a safe space for them because they have no place even to live. They're sharing a gymnasium. So you have that's the whole problem with this modern day approach, where everything is looked at by race. You have whites, you have people of color, you have the worst of the worst, Latinx, which is just makes me want to throw up in my mouth. And you can make blanket assumptions based on these very, very, very broad definitions of people. And it's simply not true, and this movie proves it. But, it would never be allowed to produce because, everyone has gone a little bit crazy. And, I think you have to take this a step further, that I'm reading so much into this. You have to realize it was just a comedy. I highly doubt the writers thought even half as much as I did, even though it's a movie about nerds, on all these different themes. They just wanted to make a funny movie. But this also stretches into comedy. And that's the other reason is, because it's a comedy movie, come on, it's funny. I mean, we back then and it is now. I think it's funny that these guys are all white and they go to the black fraternity. That's comedy. That's funny. For something to be funny, it has to push boundaries. But that's the opposite of what we have in 2020, where nothing can be funny. And, you know, there's a few examples. It's like they tried to do a remake of Ghostbusters, and they said, great, we want it to be, you know, here's an example. And it's one of the most glaring, that we want to make Ghostbusters, right? But we think it should be all women. That's great, you know. I don't think anyone would have criticized this movie if the women were funny in it, if their jokes actually were funny and made you laugh. But it wasn't the case. And now when people say, you know, the new Ghostbusters sucked, it's, oh, look at you, you're a misogynist. No, it's the movie was not funny. You know, you can't just tick off all these boxes and engineer comedy. It doesn't work that way. You know, comedy has to push boundaries, and I find it under attack. It's why I wanted to make this whole video, to show that things have gone way too far. Because look, like I mentioned, back then in the 80s, you did have a kind of cultural gatekeepers. It was, you know, these more puritanical kind of, you know, conservatives who, like I mentioned before, said everything sexual is bad. So, you know, I doubt your Southern Baptist is in 1984 was running to see Revenge of the Nerds, although I bet some did. But they didn't try to get the movie shut down. You know, at most they would maybe tell their friends, like, this goes against our values, and that was it. They didn't have the means to do so. But in our day, you know, in our modern times, 2021, that could be a reality. I mean, look at Dave Chappelle. He was the hero of the kind of, let's say, countercultural left against this Christian conservative viewpoint in the 2000s. When I was in university, everyone loved Dave Chappelle. He was the hero. He rightfully mocked a lot of things. But as soon as he no longer became of use, he got put on the naughty list. Oh, you know, his comedy, oh, don't watch it because it's not funny. I mean, that is a telltale sign that it's going to be funny if someone says don't watch it. So notice how quickly, I mean, I don't think Dave Chappelle really has changed in his views or his attitude. His jokes are very consistent. And if you notice, even in the 2000s, he had the same jokes against transgender, against gays that he did now. It's just the culture has shifted and he hasn't. And that's a perfect example. That, you know, now what's deemed to be funny is so narrow that it's not funny. And, you know, this is my whole point, that if it's going to become from if it's going to be blessed by the Hollywood gatekeepers, then by definition it can't be funny, because there is such a narrow lens of now what can be considered comedic. So I think that, you know, what's ultimately going to happen, like all cultural gatekeepers, if they, you know, drive in the screws too much, if they press too much, then all that's going to happen is there will be other outlets. So, you know, in my view, as far as comedy goes, it's probably not going to appear in Hollywood. It's going to be on more independent mediums. It will be on places like YouTube or Netflix or whatever. They're, you know, and if they decide that something can't be funny or whatever, something else will crop up. So they'll end up being their worst enemies. I wrote a blog article about this as well. So, you know, credit to you if you went through 18 minutes of this diatribe on Revenge of the Nerds. But let me know in the comments what you think. If, you know, you think my views are too out there, maybe I'm overreacting a bit, maybe I'm the one who's overinterpreting, let me know. So thanks for checking out this video. Okay, bye.